Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, which is independent and impartial. This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Ndora and this is what's coming up on the show today. The SABC has called off its retrenchment process, which would have seen over 2,000 full-time and freelance employees losing their jobs. So the question is, what next for the public broadcaster? We're also asking, can the future of journalism be secured by interventions with tech companies working with newsrooms to build capability? And the state capture inquiry, well, this week heard names of journalists allegedly paid by controversial facilities company Bosasa for good press. So that's all still to come. But before we engage with our panel with all of that, let's first take a look at some of your newspaper headlines that you're waking up to today. And we start with the Sunday Times, which is leading with a story about how President Cyril Ramaphosa has been warned by 5 world powers that his ambitious investment drive could fail unless South Africa starts to take tangible action against the perpetrators of state capture, corruption and other serious crimes. The City Press is carrying a story about how the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, is alleged to have repeatedly used his influence in his former position as the ANC's Treasurer General to help facilitate business deals involving money from the Public Investment Corporation, the PIC. The Sunday Independent, well, that's running with a story about how political parties are already in campaign mode as the EFF unveiled its manifesto yesterday at the 18,000-seater Giant Stadium in Soshanguve in Tshwane. The Sunday Tribune in KwaZulu-Natal, that's leading with a story about a shutdown is expected in Parliament when President Cyril Ramaphosa faces the country, with the EFF threatening to disrupt his State of the Nation address on Thursday. And Cape Town's Weekend Argus is reporting on how the Cape Town City Council is engaged in a fresh fight over a Jobs for PAL scandal, implicating the Department of Safety and Security's J.P. Smith and Richard Bosman. According to the publication, this emerged after the Council's first meeting for the year on Thursday. Now, this past week, the SABC announced that it would not be continuing with a retrenchment process that would have seen over 2,000 full-time and freelance workers losing their jobs. The national broadcaster said that it had decided not to renew a notice to invoke Section 189 of the Labour Relations Act in the interest of the SABC, its employees, key stakeholders and the South African public at large. Needless to say, this was welcome news by SABC staff and the unions. I spoke earlier this week to an elated Hannes Dubuisson, who's the president of the Broadcasting, Electronic, Media and Allied Workers Union, BEMAU.
We are ecstatic, we are very happy. I must say that it's the first time in months that I'm here at the SABC where I've seen people smiling and happy people. We believe that that is the right decision from the side of the SABC. What has happened is that, of course, in December the board became incorporated and then the Section 189 process had to stop. The SABC then suspended that process. We kept on talking to the SABC and advised them that that is not the route to go, that it is going to cause untold harm to the SABC as an organization. We are very close to elections, and to make those kind of changes to the SABC is, of course, could be impacting on the SABC's ability to deliver on its mandate. So we were then called on the at the end of the process that the initial notice period that was given. And we were then today informed that the SABC has decided to completely stop stop the retrenchment process, to then work with the SABC employees and unions to review the structure of the SABC. There is also, as the CEO has said, a skills audit that must be conducted. It is envisaged that that process will take about 14 months, 4 months to complete. And of course, in that process, it will be looked at whether there are employees that is not properly and at the right place placed, and there is an obligation on the SABC then to retrain those people, find jobs for them, and of course, in terms of the new digital setup that the SABC is going in, we believe that everyone will be accommodated.
All right, so that was the president of BMAO speaking to me a little bit earlier this week. Now, to discuss this issue and others during the course of the program, I'm now joined in studio by the founder and editor-in-chief of the Bar magazine, Onke Dumeko. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. I look forward to hearing about your digital publication a little bit later on. Okay. Somebody that's familiar to us who's been on the program before, media analyst and CEO of Ditsecho Media, Teboho Ditsecho. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so the public broadcaster staff are excited, they're elated, but in that statement what you heard is that this was in the interest of the public at large. And I'm just wondering, what does a public broadcaster mean to the public at large? Let me start with you, Onke.
Well, I mean, I think the public broadcaster is such an intrinsic part of how we view ourselves as the consumers of it culturally. It really is a reflection of who we are as a nation. And I think, you know, anywhere else in the world, the situation is pretty much the same. So I think the expectation on a public broadcaster is really to reflect its society in a way that's fair, in a way that's realistic, but also in a way that's inspiring and that's hopeful. So that's how important people hold the public broadcaster. If you look at most of the people today who have built the biggest careers in terms of television and film and production and all of that, a lot of them were born from this engine that is the public broadcaster. So while it has been going through some challenges, it is never to forget the importance that it has, and that it is the training ground, it is the foundation, it is where all of these people that we celebrate today, that's where everyone started.
Yeah. Teboho, I mean, when we look at private media and the public broadcaster, different mandates.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the public broadcaster is not a for-profit organization, but it does have to use basic business principles in order for it to be sustainable. So you have to have that balancing act, and the retrenchments which were in the offing, unfortunately, were going to cause mayhem in terms of unemployment in the media industry. And so I don't think that it should be like a first resort. When you want to retrench in such an industry, it should be the last resort. And where possible, I think it's very important for both the public and the private sector to support the public broadcaster to ensure that it is sustainable. And so, as Onke has said, that the public broadcaster is a reflection of society. When we look at the content there, we see ourselves in it. But more importantly, it also needs to reach every section of society. So whether you're in a rural area where you only have a radio as your means, you know, to information, then it should be able to reach you there in your language and on time and in the quality that you need it. So I think the public broadcaster is fulfilling that mandate. Moving forward, I think it needs to look at its business processes to see how it can become more sustainable. All
right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the business processes, because so the skills audit is just one layer of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we skill people for the digital era. But the funding model itself, you know, and you understand as someone who's gone into a digital environment, how can it become sustainable? If for the longest time it's been about advertising and also licenses. People aren't paying their licenses as well as they should. In fact, that's really sort of crashing and burning a little bit. So the question is, what might a new funding model for the SABC look like in the future? What kind of innovations do you think we might be able to put on the table?
Look, I mean, I think if you're talking funding models, you kind of have to look at it holistically. I know in the digital space, in terms of a resources perspective, you really need the type of people who can do more than one thing, you know. So in a traditional publication or traditional, you know, television production house, you would have one person for one job. But digital really calls on you to be kind of multi-talented. It speaks to the whole idea of reality, really, that you know you have a workforce which your younger workforce is predominantly millennials, and millennials for the most part of it are slashers, right? So someone can do 5 things, and it's not something that they're aspiring to do, it's something that they do, right? On a daily basis, they do 5 jobs and they get it done. So again, it's about looking at your resources. How do you structure them in a way that is economically efficient so that you have a person who's multi-skilled, but not used to the sense that they feel like they are drenched of all of their energy, but really valued, but at the same time their resources are utilized in a way that helps the business and also helps them pursue their dreams as much as they can. So it's a value perspective thing, and it's two-way. It's not about what the company needs, it's also about what your staff need and what they feel like they need to progress in their careers as best as they possibly can.
And these millennials don't stay in their jobs as long as our traditional SABC people have done over the years. So again, how do we model the public broadcaster in the new age?
Well, I think the basics of business need to be followed, keeping your overhead costs as low as possible, and implementing what Onke has just mentioned, of having multi-skilled employees, because that can bring your value up and the cost of that a bit lower. I think over and above that, I think some of the basics are not being followed. For an example, when you want to place an advertisement, you get taken from east to west, north to south. You don't know where is the rate cards and so on and so forth. It takes a long time to get that information. If they can speed up that process in terms of receiving emails, and when there's an advertising campaign,
so speeding up the admin and
to be more responsive.
All right, so let me ask you a question. I mean, you know, people who've traveled to the UK will know that if you switch on the BBC, you're not going to see any TV commercials on there. They're a public broadcaster. They do not, they get TV licenses and then a budget vote. I wonder, is that something we need to look at in South Africa, where we take away the commercial imperative from the SABC and just get a budget vote from Treasury to do the work of the public broadcaster?
Well, I think that in an ideal world would be the best solution. I think in the UK you have also a different type of maturity or posture when it comes to content. So you probably have a society there who completely understand it, and you have a government that supports that, you know. But here you've kind of taught people the opposite. And I don't think taking away the commercial aspect is 100% correct. Look, I mean, just because you might not be getting it right, it doesn't mean the commercial aspect is the problem. You also have to consider content. Is the type of content that you're generating, is it what people need? Is it what people need today? It might have been what people aspired to and what they needed 20, 25 years ago. But are you pushing the boundaries enough to make people feel no need to change the channel? And if that's the conversation, then your relationship with your brands and your advertisers and all of those people who want to advertise or rather partner with you, it becomes a different conversation, where you are not so much at the mercy of your advertisers, but it's more of a relationship that you're building. It's a partnership, because they see the value in having their brands on your platform, and obviously you would see the value commercially. So I mean, look, if it weren't commercial, that would be great in an ideal world. But where we are now, how do we improve the model that we have now? And from a content perspective, that is something that the SABC could also look at improving.
All right. So your thoughts, because I'm always kind of thinking that if you are commercially pressed, when people come with program proposals, some public interest television might not get funded properly because advertisers don't want to go with those kinds of things. A program on astronomy is important for the development of education, but might not get the money because advertisers are not hungry for that. So what do we do?
The public interest always has to come first. So whether or not there are advertisers if the program is of the public interest, it must go out. I think over and above that, SABC needs to learn how to disrupt itself. So it shouldn't be disrupted by the likes of Mzansi Magic. You should have had those programs on SABC first. I think beyond that, the delay in the digital rollout has also hurt the SABC financially, because it would have given the SABC more capacity and income earning opportunities. So they need to roll out their digital. And I'm not sure about the legalities around that. But if you are digital, it's much easier to collect your licenses and to take action when people don't pay. But if it's just free to air as it is currently, then it's very difficult. You cannot switch off somebody's signal.
Yeah. All right, okay, interesting thoughts there. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll start exploring this whole digital space a little bit more. But thanks very much indeed. So that's great news for staff at the SABC, but there's still quite a way to go in terms of getting the SABC digitally ready and funding itself at sustainable levels. All of that to come in terms of the digital space after this. Stay with us.
Goodness is everywhere. It's the little things you say.
Please and thank you.
It's happening here. So helpful. And here. Oops. And is it the perfect family breakfast? Wheat Bix.
Supercars, they're the pinnacle of design.
This to me was something completely different.
Engineering,
it really feels like a big go-kart.
And price.
$12 million.
Wow. Well, what makes a car a supercar?
It's an exaggeration of everything that's cool.
How you doing, Jay?
Can you give me a ride back to LA?
To find out, I take a ride with Shark Tank's Robert Herjavec in one of the most iconic cars of the 80s.
When you want to be a somebody, you buy a Ferrari. When you are a somebody, you buy a Lamborghini.
I get a one-on-one with the man behind the one-to-one. What was your biggest obstacle? Everything. But it isn't all about high speed and handling, as Nick Cannon will attest. Why a supercar?
Because girls like it.
And finally, I'll show you what was voted the greatest car of the 20th century.
Jay Leno's Garage, Tuesdays at 8:30 on 3.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor now. This week it was revealed that Tiso Black Star Group, the publisher of the Sunday Times, Times Live, Sowetan, Business Day and more, is one of just 2 South African news organizations awarded the YouTube innovation funding from the Google News Initiative. Now, the initiative aims to promote new ideas and strengthen newsrooms' digital video skills around the world. But why are interventions such as these important?
Access to reliable quality information should be a right of anybody, wherever they live.
Today, the journalism industry faces many challenges.
Readership has become more fragmented, and in many ways the experience of journalism has become more fragmented.
How can news organizations remain relevant in the digital age?
The traditional world of news media is shifting ever more quickly.
70% of people can't distinguish between a real story and fake news.
Disinformation is on the rise. Trust in media is falling. Journalists are having to do more with less.
A lot of the solutions will come from the journalism industry and the tech industry working together.
So we're announcing the Google News Initiative, our effort to enable journalism to thrive in a digital age. It will enable new models for sustainable journalism, elevate quality journalism, and ensure that technology allows journalists to do their jobs even better.
The solutions to the challenges that the industry is facing has to come from the right mix of journalism and technology.
I'm really optimistic about the future of journalism. We just need to find the best ways for it to be able to flourish.
I think there will always be a hunger for high quality journalism.
I think it's never been more important for us to work together.
And it's only through collaboration that we can do journalism in new and powerful ways. Because when journalism succeeds, we all do better.
All right, so that's the Google News Initiative, and to tell us a little bit more about that and the YouTube funding and how it hopes to help newsrooms navigate their way in this digital era, I'm now joined in studio by Michelle Tangana, who's the Communications Manager at Google. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, so you've got this project. 27 countries, 83 organizations last year that you funded. What are you trying to do?
Yeah, so the Google News Initiative is a global program which has committed $300 million to supporting the news industry, be it through different Google products such as YouTube, which is the funding that we're here to talk about today. So this particular funding, we've given 87 organizations around the world in about 30 markets for, innovation funding to help online news journalism, and online video news journalism specifically. So it's organizations that are working on bringing stories through video. As we know, as the trend in the world moves on, people are watching more and more video, and we live in the world of 24/7 internet and digital access. So how are news organizations working within those constraints that the world is creating, or rather those opportunities that are being created in the world to tell stories and bring factual information to people?
So what did you see that you thought needs a leg up? You know, are we struggling as news organizations? Is there something we're not seeing, or you're just sort of nudging us in a particular direction?
I think of any organization in the world, the one that has probably been hit the most by innovation and the tech boom has been the news organization. Moving from print to digital has not always been easy for most organizations. And as we see, millennials, we talked about millennials earlier on the show, millennials are in the world of mobile, digital, constant information. And not everyone is picking up the newspaper to read information now. They're getting their news even before it hits newsstands. So it's important for news organizations to be in that space. And as a tech company that exists in this digital world, it's also our responsibility to support in the way we can.
All right, so you're seeing more collaboration between tech companies, newsrooms, because I guess at the end of the day, it's the public that really are going to benefit from these collaborations.
Absolutely, and the hope is just being able to help people who are reporting factual information in a trustworthy way, and that's really important. I spend a lot of time watching videos, getting my information from different digital sources, and if we can help organizations who just need to be equipped to do that in a sustainable and long-term way, then why not?
All right, so here's the thing. You talked about trustworthy sources. A lot of people Google their way to fake news sites. So how are you as Google, who's enabling this, helping to combat this proliferation of fake news?
Absolutely. So a lot of people are on the internet.
Yeah.
That is without a doubt. Websites are being created every day, and there are billions of them out there. Unfortunately, you cannot always tell when something is fake news until you kind of start seeing the pattern of the content. So what we've done is we make sure we de-rank sites that are not given credible content, if they're scraping, if they're copying, and if they're publishing misinformation. And we work with a bunch of different organizations to do this. We work actually in South Africa. Africa Check is a partner through ISJ who looks at fact-checking information that you can search on Google. We also make sure they can't make money off of this. And the idea is to demonetize sites like this, so banning them from advertising products. And it's really important to get the help of the people with this. Obviously, we can't always 100% get it right. And when people flag things to us, we try our very best to make sure that we review and handle that content as soon as possible.
All right. So what I want to do is I want to bring in my guest editors to join us in this conversation now. And I want to start with you, Onke, because you have been in the print world for a long time, and you've ventured now into the digital space. And what I'm curious about your site, The Bar, is it's quite rich visually and it's moving. It's not a question of just taking your print publication and just making it digital, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, I think a lot of magazines, what they've done in trying to progress into digital is they've tried to just upload something as a PDF or whatever it is on a digital platform and said, there it is, for you can take it or subscribe or anything. But ultimately, whenever you are disseminating content, you have to respect the person who is going to consume it. So if that means having a website that takes inspiration from something that is over and above what you would expect, then that's what it is. Like you said, the website moves, it does move. We take the inspiration from water, which is ever, you know, water is just such a infinite concept. It never ends. It's the thing that just keeps on giving. It's that life-giving source. So that's the idea really there, is for everything to move and for you to feel like you are in a reservoir that is just never going to end. That's going to give you the type of content that is never going to end. And that also comes from the insight that we saw that in the film and television industry, there isn't really a lot of information out there that exists for now. So the magazine was actually founded by, I'm the editor-in-chief, but it was founded by Legend Mandela, who owns the production company Bar Leader TV. And Bar Leader is known to produce, for instance, some of the best television reality TV in the country, amongst other things. So really the Bar takes a page out of that book of production, in the sense that we said, so how do we take this idea of production that we know, lend it to a magazine model, and then build something that merges the two? So our content is really based on being the information platform, or rather the resource for the film and TV industries,
Right.
A publication platform of sorts, really where you can get the type of information that you won't find anywhere else. If I were to Google Leonardo DiCaprio now, I can tell you who he's dating, I can tell you where he is, I can tell you where he was this last weekend, I can tell you how many Oscar nominations he's up for, I can tell you what films he's currently in production with. But when it comes to South Africa and our industry, where is that information? So really, that's really the inspiration behind it, and being this kind of reservoir that never ends of information that when it comes to the TV and film industry.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this movement in particular in this digital space, because I think consumers are consuming content differently, and you know, it's just a different world, and expectations are very different. Are you optimistic, Tebogo, about the future of journalism? Because we've been trained in a certain way for so long. I'm almost thinking that journalists have to think almost like filmmakers now do, on different levels.
I do agree with that. And when you go into the digital space, it shouldn't be seen merely as an expense. It should be seen as an investment, because you're investing in the future. And I feel as if in South Africa, we're a little bit behind when it comes to the digital space. We shouldn't have been waiting for the likes of YouTube to be funding our news agencies. We should have actually founded our own YouTube. And it's quite sad that these news agencies are not using digital as much as they should, because there is a business model that you could attach to that. If you look at a program like The Breakfast Club in the US, they have a business model where they have various brands that are advertising behind while they're doing the interview. And you could have had the same thing in South Africa, but there's no sense of understanding of the business case of entering into the digital space. And I actually want to use the Bar magazine as an example, because some publications believe they've gone digital just because they've registered like a Twitter account. And now they're posting the same content that was in the newspaper on Twitter. But if you have your own website and you're publishing from there, you can then gain advertising revenue, and you can tailor make it for that particular audience.
And Michelle, and I guess also when we see this cross-pollination between YouTube and going via Google, the platforms are changing. You know, you can have your own dedicated website, but also I'm starting to see this more than collaboration, but working your content on these different platforms. YouTube is just a platform, and yet a lot of the news is consumed there.
Absolutely, because most of the time people are on the go. I don't have time to necessarily watch the news at 7 o'clock. I don't have time to watch my favorite talk show at the time it's on, but I can go consume it on YouTube. And for the organization, it's another revenue opportunity as well, because they can make money off that platform. And something we've launched specifically for news organization is something called Play for Publisher, which allows them to sell their own advertising within the platform as well. And, you know, like my colleague here was saying, is why is South Africa not embracing some of these things that are happening overseas? I used to be a journalist before I joined Google, and I ran an online publication, and every time it was, how do we make sure that the story we're telling is not just text? How do we make the people excited to read it? How do we make sure they're consumed by the content? And that's what the Google News Initiative actually does, is through different products and different collaborations with the news industry. So we're also not doing this in isolation. We are partnering with the news industry and advisors to figure out what is the best way to make this work.
All right, so you know what, we're going to leave this conversation here for the time being, but I think we're probably going to have more and more of these kinds of conversations, different platforms, different ways of communicating, different ways of doing journalism. Thanks so much indeed, Michelle, for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll continue after this break, and I want to take you to Kenya to find out what's on the front pages there.
On Network, we have gadgets, robots, and more.
A phone is no longer just an indulgent device or a functional device. It's a part of us.
What if 20 years from now, robots walk the streets alongside humans, doing many of the same jobs that you and I do today?
We find out what you mostly use your laptops for. Is it gaming or good old writing?
Education in the end must prepare young people for the workplace that is being rapidly transformed by technological change.
A new security system, Memeza, is adding a new dimension of safety, with some elderly people saying they feel much safer.
I think a big thing for people is they're just not aware of electric vehicles. They might not realize they're probably a lot easier to incorporate into their driving needs.
There's technology and social media news on Network every Saturday at 8:30 p.m. and every Sunday at 5:30 p.m.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. It's time now for us to take a look at what's been happening in the newspapers. But I thought we should start actually internationally. And we're going to go to Kenya in Nairobi, where we're going to find a freelance journalist, Reuben Kayama. Thanks very much for joining us on the program. Welcome to you.
Hello, Peter. Thank you for having me.
Habari yako?
Salama sana, but it's Johannesburg.
It's fantastic. So what's on the front pages of the main newspapers in Kenya today?
Yes, Peter. Primarily, I have the top newspapers today, the Sunday Nation and the Sunday Standard, and also the regional paper, the East African. In the Sunday Nation today, the top headline is why President Kenyatta is a bitter man, and the story is about President Kenyatta and why he's a bitter man. Insiders, according to the newspaper, say that the president is frustrated as he races against time to secure his legacy in an environment complicated by competing selfish interests and toxic succession politics. You will recall that his term comes to an end in the year 2022. And locally, there have been reports about the president's increasing hunger displayed in public, especially sometimes even telling off those he believes don't support his agenda. So that's the top story in the Sunday Nation. The same paper also highlights another interesting story where a city taxi driver has been arrested over a missing woman. The newspaper says the taxi driver was arrested in connection with the disappearance of.
All right. Hello, Reuben, are you still there?
And according to witnesses.
Okay. All right,
Yes.
take us
Can
through
you
to
hear
the
me?
next. Yeah, take us through to the next paper because we're running out of time.
Okay, in the standard, the top headline is about mystery deaths. This is a story about 3 workers who died and 5 others were treated in several hospitals after consuming an unknown concoction at a construction site associated with a local politician. Police are investigating the matter as we report this. Also, there is a story also in the standard about a local city MP. As the world marks the World Cancer Day tomorrow, the city lawmaker opens up on how away from the public glare he has been battling a form of cancer called colorectal cancer, and the challenges it presents to him while at the same time serving his people as a member of parliament.
All right, and then the regional paper, the East African?
Then in the regional paper, the East African, the top story is actually about the summit.
All right. Ruben, you still...
President Museveni, President Museveni of Uganda, Kagame of Rwanda, Magufuli of Tanzania, President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya. The story is about these leaders met even as the community faces unresolved long-standing trade disputes among the countries. Also, for Kenya and Tanzania, talks on trade in sugar and tobacco have hit a dead end. At the same time, Rwanda also has been experiencing simmering diplomatic tensions.
All right,
Its neighbor and Uganda. So that's basically the top stories in the major papers here in Nairobi.
Asante sana, my brother. Thanks so much indeed for that update. That was freelance journalist Ruben Kayama speaking to us live from Nairobi via Skype. Well, let's come back to South Africa now because our newspaper headlines are always very interesting on a Sunday. So let's find out from our guest editors today what grabbed your attention. Let's start with you this time, Teboho.
Well, for me, the first one was in the Business Times, the PIC board.
And that's in the Sunday Times newspaper.
In the Sunday Times. Yeah. And what happened is the PIC board quit after they underwrote a company to the tune of 4.3 billion despite internal concerns. So what the public needs to know about this is that the PIC owns 12.5% of the market cap of the JSE.
Right.
So that's big. And they have a lot of influence both in the private sector and also with regards to pension funds. And I think the PIC's management needs to be scrutinized a bit more because a lot of the concerns that we have with private sector companies could be influenced by the PIC.
So, you know, the state capture inquiry has kind of, I think, I'm not saying this is state capture, but what we're starting to see more and more is almost like magnifying glasses everywhere now in terms of corporate governance, how companies are being run and processes. And this is a good thing, sure.
I mean, it is a good thing. Look, I think more than anything else, we need transparency. I mean, there's an article here in the Sunday Times.
So Sunday Times, yeah.
Where it says World Powers warn SA on graft, where it talks about how our president has been warned by 5 powers that his ambitious investment drive could fall unless he cracks down on things like corruption and, you know, has a much, you know, tighter belt when it comes to that. So, look, I mean, I think these... I quite like these state capture inquiries. I think the term state capture still needs to be unpacked more. I think it's something that's catchy that people have just run with. Look, I think they're interesting. It gives people an opportunity to really understand what is happening in the higher echelons of society, and to give them an opportunity to make a more informed vote when they do go and vote. You know, do you vote knowing this? And do you still choose to vote? And if you do still choose to vote, then how do you structure your vote? Do you still continue to vote blindly based on what you know and what's comforting? Or do you take a chance, or do you still structure your vote how you always have, in the knowledge that you kind of have a better understanding and you have a better expectation. You can manage your expectations better. So I think that they're important for the citizens to the extent that they understand what's at play.
Do you think that as journalists we're telling the story properly? Because I'm getting a lot of confusion from people about whether the state capture inquiry is the be-all and end-all of solving these problems, and that the judicial process actually should be happening separately. So the police can actually investigate all the stuff that's happening. They don't have to wait for the Zondo Commission to end. And I wonder if the journalism is explaining that.
I think the journalism is trying to explain that. Is it succeeding? I'm not necessarily sure. I think what's important also for the public to know is the cost of corruption. So there's a reason why those 5 powers have communicated with the president. It's not necessarily only for their own gain. It's to understand how can you make the business environment conducive for investors to come in. And if there's corruption involved in setting up business, then you're less likely to have investment. You're less likely to also bring out the potential of your citizens, because the cost of business is too high. And you can work hard, but if you don't pay a bribe, you're not going to go anywhere. So that is why you need to deal with systemic corruption. I think more importantly, we also have to look at the amount of influence these state powers have. 75% of foreign direct investments are from these 5 countries. And it shouldn't be that way, because our neighboring countries are supposed to be our biggest trading partners. So those are the kinds of conversations that we're supposed to have, because it is not normal anywhere in the world with the biggest and most prosperous countries to have overseas countries as your largest trading partners. It's only the US and China, but South Korea and the others have their neighboring countries as their biggest.
All right, okay, we could go on with the newspapers for quite a while, but we still have another issue that I'd like us to explore soon after the break. So stand by, stay with us. You're still watching Media Monitor.
The biggest channel in Mzansi brings to you a global hit sensation, the Remix SA. Catch dynamic trios battle it out to remake some of the world's most popular hit songs.
It was absolutely super!
It's the hottest reality competition, and you don't want to get left behind.
Even more and more left.
So join us every Friday at 6 p.m. for the Remix SA, only on SABC 1, Mzansi for sure.
Right, now just before the break we saw images of the state capture inquiry, and that was again front page news last week. And on Monday, Angelo Agrizi, the former chief operating officer of the controversial facilities management company Bosasa, named some of the journalists who allegedly were on the Bosasa payroll. Agrizi testified that he was approached by the company's executive director, Papa Lishebane, who requested an amount of 71,000 rand for payments to journalists.
What was the purpose, to your knowledge, of the payment to Papa Lishebane, who, as I understand your evidence, required the money to pay journalists?
At the time, Bosasa had been going through a very rough patch in terms of negative reporting from certain journalists. And what happened was he had approached us and said he can arrange, he has some friends who are related to people and friends that he knows that have got the ability to swing the journalistic viewpoints on Bosasa, and will also be writing positive stories on Bosasa.
You say the one purpose of the payment, as communicated to you by Mr. Lishebane, was to write positive articles about Bosasa.
That is correct.
And the other, was there any other purpose?
Well, the other purpose was to get information from the press if there's a budding story or negative story that is about to happen and how to counteract it.
When did these payments commence, to the best of your recollection?
2012, around there, they really started, if I recall correctly.
Did Papa Leshabani mention any names to you in relation to the journalists who would be receiving the amount of 30,000 rand?
Yes, he did, Chair.
What names did he give you?
The one name he gave me was Ntuli, apparently working for the Times or the Star newspaper. The other one was a lady at the time that he was working very closely with called Pinky Kobane. And there was somebody that worked down in the Eastern Cape that helped him with the, I think it was the Sea Ox story or the prison story, and the person, he just referred to them as Bongs.
B-O-N-G-S.
That's what I have.
All right, so that's Angelo Grisi saying that these journalists were paid allegedly by Bosasa to write good press. Well, just to let you know that we reached out to Pinky Khwabane to talk to us about being named in this, and she said that she couldn't come into the studio, but she did send us her thoughts, and she said, look, I never met with these people. She did meet with Leshabani to speak about a story that she was chasing up. She had got a recording of the conversation between Watson and Angela Grisi, and she played a very long version of this on her her blog, and she says that the Commission of Inquiry only heard a portion of it, and the only reason she met with Leshabani was to confirm the authenticity of that recording, which he did. But she says she never got any money whatsoever from Bosasa, so she's hoping to get an opportunity to state her side of the story at the State Capture Inquiry. But we come back into studio, and the question that this does arise is the relationships, because in some of the recordings they talk about, I cultivated a relationship with journalists, and I just wonder about where does the line get drawn, crossed. So if journalists get invited to a golf day or a Christmas party, is that crossing the line?
Well, I like to say that journalism is where journalism goes, right? So if it goes to the safe space all the time, then the story is always going to be safe. You'll always be reporting about a cat that's stuck in a tree. So the reality is that it's not always the most easy job. It's not always comfortable. And I think oftentimes the lines are blurred, but they're only blurred after a line has even been created. Because sometimes the crux of the matter is that, you know, ultimately a journalist has a mandate and they need to get a story out, you know, so people don't understand the pressure on journalists themselves to report on whatever it is that they're reporting on. Having said that, journalists do not work independently, they work for publications. So for me, this also leads to the ethics and the leadership values of the publication itself, because ultimately a journalist can't run a story by themselves. They're not going to be the ones to print it. They submit it, it gets approved, it gets printed. So from a leadership perspective, from a value and ethics perspective of whatever publication they're writing for, what are the journalistic values that have been entrenched there, that have been built there? That's the question that we should be asking, because some publications of late, their own values have been questioned recently.
And sometimes it's not even with the newsmaker directly. Sometimes there's a step in between, and it's public relations companies that establish these relationships with news agencies, reporters, and so on and so forth. Talk to me a little bit about that space.
Well, the bottom line with public relations is that you do not pay for publicity unless it's advertising. So if you don't pay a journalist for publicity, and if you want to advertise, you go to the advertising department and you pay the publication, and they'll advertise if it meets the requirements. It's that simple. So if a journalist is taking money in return for influencing stories or whatever, they are not only destroying their own reputations, they are also hurting the credibility of the journalism industry. It works the same for public relations organizations. You should never, ever pay anyone to give you good publicity. That's not how it works. How it works is that they will publicize something based on the strength of the story, on the strength of the pitch that you've submitted. And that's how our industry works. And so if the likes of Bosasa are busy paying people, for good publicity, they're destroying both the journalism industry as well as the PR sector. So I don't think, that is acceptable at all.
All right, we ran out of time, but 30 seconds each. What's going to be the big story that you think might be tracking this week?
This week,
State capture.
Again.
But EFF manifesto probably will get analysed quite a bit this week.
The EFF manifesto has been, it is currently, it continues to be analysed. But I think the state capture conversation is a never-ending one. So it's one that I keep my ears and my eyes open to.
Both the EFF and the ANC manifesto, I want journalists to go and check the promises that were made. If you have a SASA card, you'll get free electricity. Is that feasible? What will that do to inflation? We need to start being critical when we analyze.
About what they're saying and what they're promising, whether it's doable.
Absolutely.
Onke Tebogo, thanks very much indeed for joining us. You've been great. A lovely conversation. Thanks so much for being in the program.
Thank
you, Peter.
All right. And you at home, thanks so much indeed for tuning in. We'll see you again at the same time. You've been watching Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.